everyone. This is Nick from Tenacity.ai with my co-host Jason, and you're listening to the Cloud Cost Optimization Podcast. Today, we're going to talk about how to sell FinOps to your organization, and what that's going to entail is thinking about the outcomes and thinking about the sorts of personas that you're going to be interacting with as you think about FinOps and its place within your organization. So first, Jason, let me just turn it over to you immediately. When we're selling internally the idea of FinOps, who are the players, first of all, that we need to think about in who we're going to talk to?
Definitely finance plays a role in this, looking at engineering or operations, cloud operations, within the organization. You may have product owners that would be stakeholders within that as well. So especially business line, if you have business line owners that are responsible for an entire P&L of that particular business line, and cloud is a heavy or a large ticket item in their budget, they're definitely going to want to understand this stuff. So I think, you outside of the FinOps practitioner persona, whatever you have within the organization, you're going to have executives, stakeholders, business product owners, engineering and operations, finance, and maybe procurement if you have a separate function, depending on the organization, right? Some organizations have a separate function for procurement or even IT procurement. But the finance, engineering, and the executive stakeholders that would be responsible for the P&L are the main stakeholders.
So let's talk about then those executive stakeholders, because I think it's important to address sort of the personas you're going to be selling to, because they have different needs. So you're going to have an executive sponsor somewhere inside the organization, and then you're also going to have the executive team that's responsible for strategy. So let's talk about first, like, executive sponsor. Where does that typically come from?
Well, it can be depending on the organization, and given that FinOps is sort of new, it's kind of evolving. But right now, the CTO seems to be where it predominantly sits within the organization, where you're going to get the primary responsibility for not only the accountability from a cloud perspective, but also the rest of the executive team coming down on the CTO for making sure that cloud is wrangled in, spend, optimized, et cetera.
Yeah, I think it would be, I think I would lump CIO in there as well, depending on the organization. You have a CIO or CTO or sometimes both, but just sort of depends on if you're thinking about it operationally or from an engineering perspective.
Very dependent on the organization. And yes, CTO, CIO, I would, from a FinOps perspective, it's also almost synonymous from a FinOps perspective. The problems they have and frustrations, as well as the objectives they have for the reasons why they would want to implement such a system. So,
notably, we're not saying the CFO. In this case, why not? Why is the CFO not the executive sponsor in these cases? In most cases,
they're definitely a stakeholder, but because they're not accountable to the cloud spend of the organization, right? They're accountable to the board and making sure that they accurately forecast and predict, future spend, revenue, et cetera. And so they're a key stakeholder, because if we budget inaccurately, right, and we let's say we're low on the budget side, right, that's going to be an issue, because we're going to be spending more. Our profitability is going to be down from where our CFO has projected it to the relevant stakeholders of the organization. But also on the low side, if we sandbag and we have some high budget, that also affects what we've communicated to our stakeholders from a financial perspective, right? Because we've told them we were going to be at a certain place of profitability, and whether we're above or below, that can have the same issue. So they're a major stakeholder, but at the end of the day, they're not accountable for cloud spend, so they can't be the primary, typically aren't the primary executive sponsor.
Well, I also think it plays into sort of their role in the organization. Most CFOs are fairly strategic, and cloud spending is
Right.
some drop in the bucket of what they're worried about. So when you're thinking of the perspectives in this, why a CTO, a CIO is going to be an executive sponsor, because cloud spending is actually a fairly significant amount of their budget, might even be as big or nearly as big as labor. And in small organizations, it might be bigger.
Second biggest for sure in a lot. Mm-hmm. Second biggest for sure outside of people, typically.
Right. And when you think in terms of the CFO's perspective, you know, they're going to be far more focused on their debt covenants. They're going to be far more focused on M&A activity. They're going to be far more focused on, you know, overall strategy and outcomes. This is a drop. You know, this spending's a drop in the bucket comparatively.
It's definitely tactical in nature, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's
to them. Yeah.
To them, absolutely, because it is a smaller port. They're definitely an important stakeholder, and but they're definitely going to be. They should be more focused on strategy and not down in the weeds trying to figure out where costs are going. They should be reported back to, right? And the key is making sure that you have the data necessary to give them what they want, CFO, right? To satisfy the objectives that they have from a cloud spend perspective, which is really just making sure that you're managing costs during growth, and that you're not and that you're accurately forecasting into the future. Those are their main objectives.
So let's talk about the CEO. So where, you know, when and where does the CEO fit into you know, FinOps from a, you know, needing to bring the organization along and integrating it into the practices of the organization? When would it be important to bring the CEO along as well?
CEOs are going to be really focused on the acceleration of growth and less on cost cutting measures. So how your organization leverages the cloud to accelerate growth, maybe create some sort of advantage against your competitors, if you can still do that. I mean, a lot of people are using the cloud. Faster time to market on certain things, right? Those are the key drivers and objectives that a CEO is going to be looking at. Less on cost visibility and accurate forecasting, and more, how the heck can I use the cloud to accelerate growth in our business and beat our competitors?
Yeah, I think it's when cloud or cloud-based technologies are competitive advantage. That's important then to bring along as well your CEO as one of the key stakeholders. I mean, they're a stakeholder either way, but how important this is to them is going to be relative to how critical cloud is in the business strategy. So,
and how well you're managing it today, right? I mean, the only reason why a CEO, depending on the size of an organization, may get down into something other than just growth and strategy is if you don't have a good handle on it and you can't answer the questions when they have them, right? I mean, we've heard that over and over. I cannot answer I get a question from the CEO on why does this why is our cloud spend like this, or why is it growing like this? I can't answer the question. CEO is going to want to make sure
smaller organizations
having the information.
Yeah. Small organizations.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep. I think
so,
large
again,
organizations, this is a blip. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
It's got to be a significant portion of. It wouldn't be a blip at Snapchat, but cloud has to be a significant, meaningful portion of your overall cost structure for the cost savings or optimization piece to bubble up to that level, right?
So I think it's important then to talk about the sorts of outcomes that that FinOps can achieve. You know, where are the, you know, what are the capabilities you want to be thinking about when you think in terms of how to bring your organization along, or how to sell your organization on FinOps as a practice? What are those areas that FinOps is really going to help?
Well, let me answer one way. First of all, I always like to say is just know your audience, right? I mean, to me, that's the most important thing, right? We've talked a little bit about what's important to some of these personas. But the first thing to do is, one, identify who can be your executive sponsors, we've mentioned, understand who the stakeholders are, and to what level are they going to be involved in the decision-making process for adopting something like FinOps. And then from there, it's about aligning the problems that the organization faces with how FinOps will solve some of those problems in the language that your persona identifies with. So as we mentioned with CEO, it's going to be about accelerating growth. We talked a little bit about CFOs. It's going to be more about cost visibility and making sure that you're accurately forecasting. But the key is that, one, I'm assuming you have a set of problems identified because you're looking at FinOps and aligning those problems with how FinOps will help you solve them to the personas that you're talking to. Hello.
So I have. So when I think in terms of FinOps outcomes, I'll break that down into a list because I think it's going to be about accountability or allocation. Really understanding where the costs of the business are going. That's FinOps is going to help the executive sponsor. It's going to help the executive team. It's going to help the engineering team from that perspective as well. Really understanding where those costs should align. We've talked about this problem before, where a lot of times the engineering teams or tech teams are seen as a cost center, and you want to see yourself as revenue aligned. So being able to take those technology costs and pull them out of kind of the cost-centric IT or engineering costs and be able to align them to actual business costs, so you can show that costs grow as the business grows, et cetera. I think that's really important. So cost allocation is a big one. I think the second one is forecasting. It's really important, and it's really hard to do from a real-time perspective to be able to make those kind of data-driven decisions that are necessary in the cloud world, because you're working now on a variable cost spending model. And so forecasting becomes much more important than it did in a world where you did a capital expenditure and amortized over 3 to 5 years. It's just a very different
forecasting
model
was
for
kind of
looking at
taken,
the world and spending.
Yeah. Forecasting was kind of taken care of when you purchased equipment on a 1, 2, or 3 year cycle. Absolutely. The variable cost model
much
of the
less
cloud
was
has
variable.
completely changed it. Yeah, right. Much less of it was variable.
Yeah, and then I think I think you have, in terms of really important across the organization, is budget management, especially with that variable cost model, is being able to understand where we're at within the budget. Are we as expected? Are we if we're outperforming on a revenue perspective, is the budget similarly needing to adjust? Or if we're underperforming, again, in the cloud variable cost world, your budget should be able to actually adjust with poor performance as well. And that leads us to kind of the final piece, which is, I think, one of the harder things to achieve without FinOps as a practice inside an organization, which is really being able to measure unit costs. And unit costs have been elusive forever in the product world, right? Because they're always a guess. And it's now we have the data to actually make really good decisions around what those unit costs are. And the engineering team can then be able to show back the sorts of decisions that happen from the business side. They can actually measure, the unit cost and predict the unit cost based on the sorts of decisions that the business is making. So
completely agree.
I think tie these two things together.
Yeah, it gives them the tools they need. I mean, listen, you give engineers the data they need to understand how the day-to-day decisions they make affect spend and utilization, and accountability will rise, right? Which you talked about as one of the primary things. So, increased cost visibility down to unit economics, right? More accountability to make sure that from a utilization standpoint, more accountability for utilization, cloud utilization, as well as allocating your costs down to the individual, really. But whatever is important in the business's context are the main reasons why everyone outside of the CEO really would want to adopt FinOps. And then from a CEO's perspective, hammer in on how this is going to help us do things faster, make more money, accelerate growth.
So, tie those together. So you want to think about the core capabilities of FinOps as you're thinking about your pitch to the organization, and you're thinking about advancing your pitch as you progress in selling this concept and in selling, the need for FinOps. It's not just the implementation of the framework and a new process around how to think about cloud spending, but also it's potentially a team that's going to be built. And so you want to think about the sorts of outcomes and capabilities that FinOps can deliver, what those outcomes can potentially be, and then align it to those different personas. So you got your, kind of product and engineering persona, you got your CFO persona, of course, but really importantly, you have your executive sponsor. You want to think about what they want to achieve. Of course, it's going to be accelerating year-over-year growth. That's going to be really important. It's going to be having strategic significance, from a technology perspective. How can I better leverage technology to gain competitive advantage? That's critical. It's very different now than it was even 5 years ago. So, don't sell short on that. It's being able to be data driven in decisions and be able to show why decisions are made, really understand economics. There's nothing more powerful than being a CTO, sitting at the table, getting hammered for some cost and being able to show that, hey, look, this is what happened to our revenue. Here is the cost that we said was going to happen. Here's the unit economics. Right. Here's the data. It did exactly what we predicted it would do. And that is a game changer because it switches the conversation then to growth as opposed to cost. So, thinking in those terms, I think is really important.
Absolutely.
Anything else to close out the show, Jason?
I think we summed it up pretty well there.
Awesome. All right. Head up to tenacity.ai, check out the platform. Of course, download our cloud cost optimization handbook. Looking forward to your feedback. We're continuously updating it, and tune in next time for more on FinOps and implementing it in your organization. Thanks, everyone.